Good evening.
Good evening, Professor.
Okay, so last class we did couple example on functions. So we will continue with function today. So we know to write a function, right? There are two things, right? There's a title line and then the block of code that perform our task. And in the title line, we will specify the result type and then the name of the function. In parentheses, we will set the parameter. Right? And then we will define the parameter. It's similar to how we declare the variable. So you have the data type with the parameter name. To call a function or to use a function, you will just have the function name and then whatever the argument that you need for the function. Right? So you need to give the input for whatever the function that's required. Okay, let's look at the first example. So we want to write a function called max3, which will calculate the maximum of 3 inputs. Okay, so let's say the main function will look like the following. You will ask, let's say you will ask the user for 3 value, right? So I declare A, B, and C. And then we will ask the user to enter 3 integers. And then we will store the value. And then we will see out your maximum input is and then we will call the function max3 and then we will pass in A, B, C, the 3 variable we have, so it will print us the maximum value of the A, B, C. Then we'll end the line. So this is pretty much what the max3 function does. So how do we write this function? So we know to write a function, we need to have the title line and the block of code. How would the title line of this function gonna be? Okay, so if you look at the title line, we will start with the result type. So if you look at here, the cout, we will need to return the maximum value. So we know the result type is an int. And then it will follow by the function name. And we have the function name max3. Then in the parameter, where we need to define what input we want to store. So if you look at it, the 3 value will be passed in, A, B, C, they are all integer type. So we will pass in int x, int y, int z. Okay, now we need to print out the maximum numbers. Now if you just have 2 variable, right, we did it last we did the max function last class. You just compare the two value and then print out whichever that's larger. But here we have three variable, right? So let's just compare two at a time. And let's say we will set the first value as the max value, which means if you compare the x and y, if y is larger, if your x is greater than y, then we will just change the x value to y. All right, so then after this, no matter which one is greater, you will always have the maximum value between the x, y equals to y, or equals to x. Right, so here, if x is greater than y, and nothing happens, just move on. If y is larger, then you change your x to your y value. So x will be the maximum of the two. Then you just need to compare the x value with the z value. So you do the same thing. If z is greater than x, you change the x value to z. Okay, then your max value will just be x. So you return the x. Any questions here? Okay, so we will put the code in and then see, does it run the way we want it to run? So if you look at that here, we already have the main function. So we will put in the max function. So we have int max 3. And then we will input x, int x, int y, and int z. If y is greater than x, we will change x value to y. And then we will compare z with x. If z is larger, then we will set x to z. Then x will become the maximum number, and then we will return it. Right, so the code here will be the same as what we have here. Okay, so I won't print it again, so I will just compile it and run it. So it will ask us to enter 3 integer. Did anyone want to give 3 integer? Okay, so I see 2, 1, and 5. So let's just try 2, 1, and 5 because that's the first one. And I see people asking for the code. The code is the same as here. So here is your code for the function, and here's the main program. Okay, once we run it, right, it will return us your maximum input is, and then it will give us the maximum of A, B, and C, which in our case will be 2, 1, and 5. It will give us the maximum value of 5. I see people asking, is it possible to put the code after the main function, or does it mess up the code? Well, if you remember, right, advice or rule I give you last class is whenever you call a function in the main function, you must declare or you need to write the function before you use it. So you should have it before the main function. Okay, and I see people asking, is it better if x is less than y, then we return y, and if x is less than z, then you return z, else you return x. If you do that, that means you are returning the value after you compare the two number, right? So if you try it here, right? So you have 2, 1, and 5. So you will compare is x less than y. Now in our case, your x is not less than y, so you will not print anything. Okay, so in here, your x is not less than y. And if you look at the code here, you have if x is less than y, you return y. That means if you have 2, 3, and 5, then you will print 3. Do we see that? Do I need to write that down? If you have if x is less than y, return y. If x is less than z, return z. And then you have else, returned x. Then if your x is 1, y is 2, and z is 3. Then if you compare 1 and 2, 1 is less than 2, then you will print out 2, but you did not compare with the third number. Okay, I see people asking, if you have x is less than y and y is greater than z, then you return y and then you check, then there's a lot of cases there, right? If you do that, then you pretty much doing the scenario manually, then there is a lot of cases. Okay, I see people asking how the code changed for the full variable. Okay, so if you look at what we have here, right, for the full variable, you can just check the x with your fourth variable. If your fourth variable is greater than x, then you set x to the fourth variable. So what this does is it will always make the first variable the largest number. Right, so if you call the fourth w, then you will add a line. If w is greater than x, you will set x equal to w, and then you still will print out the x. Yes. Okay, I see people asking, can you write that on the board? What do you want me to write? You just add a line. So if you want to have another variable, then add another variable in. Then here you add the line. If w is greater than x, you will say x equals to w. So you just compare the x with the fourth variable. So if the fourth variable is larger, you set x to w. Okay, so let me erase that since here we just want the 3 variable. Okay, and I see people asking, would the code work if we get rid of the C out max? If you mean from the main program, right? From the main function, you want to get rid of this line? Okay, I see people say just the C out. So you want to connect this with the previous line? Yeah, so if you get rid of the semi colon and then get rid of the CL, just connect this after the previous line is fine, right? Because I want to have the space here on the right, so I just start like I end the line here, right, with a semicolon, then I start with another CL. Right, then you pretty much will connect this in the previous line. Okay, so we did quite a few example function or how to make our own function. Now it's time maybe to know exactly or to know just a little bit more detail about how the function runs. So when we call a function, the C++ actually performs something called the call by value. So what it does is whenever you see a function, right? Let's say you are running the main function, like the main program, and then you hit a function. So what it does, it will stop working on the current task, and it will switch to the function you are calling. And then it will create variable for each parameter. And then for the argument you need to calculate, it will make photocopy of those value as initial value of the parameter. And then it will perform the block of code in your function until you reach a return. So if you look at our program here, right, so we have the main function, and then we declare 3 variables A, B, and C, right? And they are all integer type. So you can think of you have 3 variables A, B, and C. And then it will ask you to enter 3 integer. And let's say we enter the integer as 2, 1, and 5. Okay, and then it will print out your maximal input is, and then it will print out the max 3 ABC. So it will call on the function. So whenever you see call a function, it will stop working on the current task. So it will pause here, switch to the function. And then it will create variable for each parameter. So if you look at it, in the parameter, we have the variable x, y, z. Now you can name it wherever you want. So if you want to call it ABC, it's also fine. You can call it whatever you want. And that's your parameter name. So it will create the variable for the parameter. So in here, we call it X, Y, and Z. Okay, now we want to calculate the argument for the function. I see people asking, so we put the max 3 in the font. What do you mean we put the max 3 in the font? Like before int a, b, and c. To call a function, you will have its function name and then wherever the argument you need. So if you look at that, right, to use the function, you will just need to have the function name and wherever the input you require. Okay, so now again, to calculate the arguments, right, we want to make a photocopy of those variable as initial value of parameter, right? So we want to calculate those value, right, for the maximum. But to do so, we will make a photocopy of those value into the parameter. So x will becomes 2, and then your y will be 1, and then z will be 5, right? So in the order how you pass in the value, right? So your x is a, y is b, and then z is c. So once you've done that, it will perform the block of function until you reach a return, which means it will run your block of code here. Right, so if you look at it, if y is greater than x, you will set x equal to y. So if you check here, y does not greater than 2. So you don't do anything. You only make change when y is bigger. So you move on. So what does this mean? This means when you compare the first two numbers, the first number is always bigger. Otherwise, you will set this as the bigger number. And then you will check x with z. So you will check 2 and 5. So you have z is bigger, right? Since z is 5. So what it does is it will change the x value to 5. So you will change it to 5. Right, so after this, it will return x. X is the 5 here. So you will return x. Now, where do this x returns to? Right, so once you hit a return, it will return to work on T. T is wherever the task you paused before. And then you switch the function. So you will return to your previous task. And then it will replace the function by whatever your return answer, right? So here we return x, which means this return, it will return to your function call. So it will return to the max 3, A, B, and C, where you call it. So which means it will return the 5 to the function. So once you return, it will treat the max as the result. So you have 5. So you will see out 5. So you will print out the 5 here. Do we see that? Okay, so if you notice that here I make a note here, right? If you look at it, we actually change the value in our function. And any changes to the function parameter, right? This is the function parameter, are temporary, which means it's not seen anywhere outside of function. So it will only change the value for x. Now, if you look at the main function, the a, b, and c is not changed. We did not change the value for a, b, and c. we are working on the photocopies of those data. So if you look at our function here, right? So if you want to change the X, Y, Z to A, B, and C, it will work the same. But you just call your parameter as A, B, and C. It just have a different name. Now I see if it's a photocopy, why isn't it equal? Equals to what? Equals to the original data. C and then the what do you mean C and X? You mean this C value and then the X value here? This value have okay, so so what this is saying that whatever change you made inside the function, it will not affect the data outside of the function. It's just the value you are working in the function is the parameter, is the argument that you are passing. So you will make a photocopy of those arguments into your parameter. It's like you initialize it. Now, any changes you make inside of the function, it stays in the function. And then you will return a value. But if any change you make here, it won't affect the number outside of the function. So if you look at that here, X here actually represent the A. Right, so if you look at it here, we actually change the X value to 5. But it will not affect the A. A is still 2. Do we see that? So that's what it means. Your changes is temporary. So even if you call this A, B, and C, it's still the same. It's just a photocopy. So if I save this and then run it, it works the same. But it will give you the maximum input is 5. Now, if you want me to print out the A value, here we will see out in we will see out A. Actually, we need it. We will print that here right after we store the A. Okay, I see people say, so the photocopy is you have X equals to A, Y equals to B, and Z equals to C. Then clear those values after the function is done. Okay, so what it does is you create a new variable X, Y, Z. Now you make a photocopy means you will set the X value as whatever value you have for 2. And then Y to be the value for 1, then C will be value for 5. Right, so once your program finish running, the X, Y, Z is gone. It have nothing to do with your main function. So you can think of it will clear those value up. Good. So if you look at here, Okay, so here's the code. Oh, I forgot to put inline there. And so I see people asking, so the photocopy happens automatically? Yes, that's when we perform call by values. So that's what it does, like behind the scene. You don't do it, right? We don't do it manually. Right, so in the code we are written here, you don't see the photocopy, you don't see the assignment. That's what happened when you pass in the value. So if you look at it, you pass in A, B, and C. So this A, B, and C will get, you can think of it will, so for the function, it have the X, Y, Z, this 3 variable. Now when you pass in A, B, and C, the value will get stored in the X, Y, Z. So you are working on with this X, Y, Z, not with the original data. So whatever changes remains here. So if you look at it, like we change the X to 5. So whatever changes stays here. It does not affect A, B, C, right? It does not affect the original data. So if you look at it here, we have, we pass in 2, 1, and 5. So originally your A is 2. Now we will print the max value 5. So if you look at it, the A here later get changed to 5. But if you get out of the function, if you print A again, it's still 2. So it does not change the data outside of the function. Okay, so this is what it means call by value. And that's all the program we have used so far. They are all called by value. And since there's call by value and we bring it up, that means there must be something that's not called by value. So the second option are you can call the parameter, or you can call a function by reference. So it's something we call by reference. Okay, so in call by reference, the function does not work with a photocopy. It works with the original data, which means any changes you make is permanent. So if you make change inside of the function, it will affect the data outside of the function. So you can think of if the X here is called by reference, whatever change you make here, right, the 5 here, you make the change, it will affect this A value. This A will also change it to a 5. So when you call a function, each parameter, right, each input, you have a choice. You can either call it by value, which you work with the photocopy, whatever change you make in the function does not affect the actual value, or you can call it by reference, which whatever change you make inside of the function, it will affect outside of the function. Okay, so to do so C++ allows you to treat a function parameter by call by reference. You just mark this in the title line by putting an ampersand, right, this notation, ampersand, between the data type and the name of the parameter when you declare it. So if you go back to our original example, right, so if you look at here, right, I print an original A before we run the function, and then I print it after the function. Now let's say I want to change this. We want to change this A as called by reference, which will just add an ampersand between the data type and then the parameter name, then whatever change I make to A, it will affect outside of the change. So let me save it. Now, if I run 2, 1, and 5, if you look at it, right, it will print out, it will change the A value outside of the function. We see that? Okay, now let me change it a little bit. Okay, so now let's say I just add another command. So let's say I want B equals to B plus C. I just want to change the value somehow. So I want to change the B value. I let B equals to B plus C. Will that affect the B value here? So let's see out A and B. Okay, so I see people say no. And why not? Okay, I see people say B is still called by value. So if you look at that, we did not put an ampersand for B. So if I save this and compile it, so if you look at the A, 2, 1, and 5, our A and B are 2 and 1, 2 and 1. So it will print out the max value is 5. And then if you look at after we run the function, the A and B become 5 and 1. So whatever change we have here, this B here, it does not affect outside of the value. Right, since we do not put an ampersand here. So the change remain in the function. So if you look at this example here, you can think of you have A, B, C from your main program. And then you have your function max3, A, B, and C. Now your A is called by reference, which means this value is tied with the original data. And then you have B and C. So B and C is the photocopy. So when you pass in the value, so if you have 2, 1, 5 here, A is called by reference, so this is 2, and then you make a photocopy of 1 and then the 5. Now when you run the function, right, so you know this A will get changed to a 5. And since it's called by reference, the original data is also changed by 5 since they are the same. So wherever you change you made here, it will update here because it's the same value. So this A here just a reference. Then B here later we change it with we will change B as B plus C. So this B will change to 6. Right, and once we return the A, so we return the 5 to the function. Then in your original data, in your main function, your A, B, and C will become 5, 1, and 5. Does that make sense here? So when you have a function, right? So for each parameter, you can decide you want to call it by value and call it by reference. Okay, so now let's look at next example. So you want to make a swap function. So if you look at the main program, this is how the program will run. You have like two scored, right? Integer type, you have, there are my score is 0 and your score is 10. So I want to swap my score with your score since your score is higher. So after I swap the score, then I will expect my score to be 10 and your score to be 0. And then it will return the program. We will end here. So how do we write the swap function? Okay, we will start with the title line. So what's the title line of this function? What's the return type? So we'll start with the return type of the function. Okay, I see people say int. If you look at the swap function, do we need to return anything as a replacement as the function? No. So if you don't need anything as a replacement of the function, what should the return type be? It will be void, right? Remember when we run the function, whatever gets returned, it will replace the function by the return answer. But if you look at our program here in the main function, you don't need to return anything, right? So the goal of this function is to swap these two values, but you don't need to replace this function with any data. So it will be the void type because you don't need this function to return anything. And then the function is called swap. And how would the parameter be? How do you want to define your parameter? Okay, we will define the parameter as pretty much how we declare the variable. So we need two input, and they are both integer type. So we need int and then two values. So we can just call it int x and int y. You don't need to use my score and your score. My score and your score is the value you are passed into this function. When you name your parameter, it could be anything. So it doesn't need to be my score and your score. It could be any two integer. It doesn't need to represent the score. So we can just call it int x and int y. Now, if we do this, can we change it? Can we change the my score and your score? Can we change the data outside of the function? No, right? Because whatever change you make stay in the function. So that means once you exit the function, my score is still 0, your score is still 10. So how do we fix it? Okay, I see people have int y and int x. If you swap the parameter, it doesn't matter. It's just the first variable. So the x and y here is just some variable name. you can name it wherever you want. So if you want to call the first variable y, second variable x, you can do that. But it have nothing to do with your schoolwork, right? So we know whatever change, if you want to make permanent change, we need to call it by reference. So we will just need to add an ampersand in between the data type and then the name of the variable. Right? Because we know we want to swap the my score and your score, which means you want to change the two variable here. Okay, so now how do we swap the function? Can I just let x equals to y and y equals to x, and then just return? Since it's return, it returns nothing, so I just hit return and then finish here. Okay, I see people asking no need to match the variable name. Again, the name you pass in here or your argument, because you need to pass in two integer to do the swap. Now we pass in my score and your score because you want to swap these two data. So this is the variable name you pass in. When you write a function, which means you need to define your parameter, you can name your variable however you want. So you know you will pass in two integer type data. So you have int, and then you just call it something. So you just give it a name. So we give it x and y. And since you want whatever change you make inside of the function affect the variable outside of the function, then we add the ampersand a. So you don't need to match the variable name. It doesn't make any sense to match the variable, because you can pass in your value first and then my value, your score first and my score first, my score second. So when you write the function, you can name your parameter however you want, and then when you write your block, you will just use the variable as how you named it. Now, wherever the data you pass in, right, then my score will become the x, and then your score will become the y. So the order always matters, yes. So the order will read in whichever order you define the parameter. Then when you pass in the argument, you will pass in the argument in the order you define the parameter. You can name it however you want, but it's the order that will get matched up. Does that make sense now? So even you name the same thing, you can have your score and my score. It will just pass in. It will pass in the value in its corresponding position. It doesn't matter you name it the same or different. Okay. Now, does this work here? Can I swap x and y by simply setting x equals to y and y equals to x? Okay, I see people say yes and I see people say no. So let's see what happened here. Right, I have x and y value. So x, I will pass in my score. So my score is 0. And your score, so y, right, your score will pass into y, so y will be 10. And then we will say x equals to y. So this x will become 10. And then you will say y equals to x. What happened here? Right, once you say x equals to y, your x is already changed. Then when you say y equal to x, you are setting the y as the new x. And there's no way you can find the original data. There's no way you find this 0. So what we need to do is we need to store this 0 somewhere before we change the value, right? So I see people say we need to create a temp function. So we can create another variable called temp, and then we will store the x value. So we will declare a temp that will equal to x. So we will store the 0, store the x value somewhere, and then we can change the x to y. And then for y, we will set the y to the number we store, right, before we change the x. So we will set the y to temp. Okay, so I really coded the second example. So here's the swap function, and then here is our main function. So let's quickly run it. Right, the code is here, like how we write it. So if you look at it, when we run it, we have my score is 10, your score is 0. So it does swap our number. Okay. Now, one more question before we leave. If I get rid of the %, here, what will happen? What do you expect the outcome? So instead of have the % on both x and y, if I just have the % on x, how would that affect our outcome? I see people say no change in y. So what would the outcome be? What will my score be? Okay, so I see people say both will be 10. Right, so if we save it, and then let me compile it. Right, so if you look at that, my score is 10. Right, so it changes your score to my score. And then for your score, even though you swap in the function, but you did not make any, it's not called by reference. So there's no changes made for the y value. So for the your score, it's not passed in by reference, so it won't change the your score. Any questions here? For which code? The modified code? The only difference is I get rid of the %.
Yeah, can you go back to that, please? I just want to take a screenshot, if you don't mind.
For the modified code?
Yes, please.
So the modified code is pretty much same as this one. I get rid of the % here. So you did not change the your score.
Got it. Thank you so much.
So for the swap function, you need to have the % because you want to modify my score to your score and your score to my score. So you need to have % on both. Any other questions? Okay, if not, I will see everyone next week. Have a nice weekend.
Have a good weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Professor. Have a nice one.
Thank you, Professor.
Take care, Professor. Have a good one.